The pleasure for this, my final speech in the Commons before the general election. The electors of Kirkcaldy and Cowdenbeath will determine whether I return to make any speeches here in the future. I was intrigued and enjoyed the opening of the Honourable Member for Bootle when he pointed out that this was a rather strange debate, that we're having a subject matter when we're facing being dragged out of the European Union, and yet we're discussing convergence. Indeed, I took a leaf out of the Honourable Member's leader. I thought, since I knew this would be a tremendously popular debate, and you can just look around the filled benches to see how popular, I thought I would tweet that I was going to be speaking on this important topic. My hope was that I would get the equivalent of Mary from Rochdale letting me know what the key points were that I should raise. I have to say there was only one person replied with a suggestion of what I should include in my speech, and it was, could you say hello to my Auntie Sadie from Balloch? So I couldn't possibly do that in a speech of such importance, but perhaps this clarifies that many of the things that we debate in this House are of a very technical nature and difficult for the public to engage in, but on a serious note are nonetheless very important. The Minister talked in his early remarks about the OBR and the forecasts that were made, and indeed showing great prescience, or the lack of it in my part. Yesterday, Scott started to work for me for the first time. He started his job on the day that the general election was declared. So I gave him one task to prepare for this speech. I asked him to contact the library and find out how many independent evaluations had ever been done of the Treasury or Treasury OBR model of the UK economy. And eventually this morning the library got back to say they could find no independent evaluations of the OBR or Treasury model of the economy had ever been undertaken. This is perhaps not very surprising when you see some of the results of this model, and indeed I thought in following up I asked him to have a look at how the model was described by the OBR, and to which you can find on the OBR website the wonderful statement that much of this model is based on not hard fact, but based on the judgments of those using it. And different people who are using it, the result might be incredibly different from using the same model. So I think that there will come a time in the future when governments of whatever shade are going to have to consider the way in which we understand and model the economies, and how far we can ever rely on forecasts of the type that we have been receiving in this House for a good number of years. I thought, since this could obviously be a fairly wide-ranging debate, but thinking about the future, I thought there would be one or two remarks I could make about issues that will still need to be addressed when we exit the European Union. And the exit in itself won't contribute anything. It will require the will of government to be able to do something. The Minister mentioned, quite rightly, the importance of business investment. One of the debates that we held in this House, I think it was last year, and the Honourable Member from Bootle, I seem to recall, took part in it, was a debate on quantitative easing. I think that was slightly less popular than this debate with the numbers that took part in it. Nonetheless, it was interesting at that time that so many of those who decided to speak talked about the problem that QE had created for investment. The assumption from the original essay by Friedman back in 1969 was that introducing QE would lead to a rise in asset prices, the consequence of which would be to increase confidence in business and lead to a significant increase in investment. And we know that that has not happened, despite well over 600 billion of QE being introduced. It would be interesting to know how the government, or the future government, is going to tackle the rewinding of QE. There's also been, in recent days, some very intemperate remarks made by senior bankers about the business sector. I would like to point to one just, I think, 2 days ago, 3 days ago in the Express, when a senior banker, as he was quoted from RBS, talked of SMEs who were pursuing getting some reconciliation to the problems they've had through GRG and the like. They were called by the senior executive of RBS as a bunch of chancers. Can you imagine any other industry that would talk about their customers as being a bunch of chancers? And they were apparently a bunch of chancers because they might have the audacity to go to the courts and seek redress. Right? And what do you know when you look at the RBS accounts? You will see that they have tripled the amount of money RBS has set aside for the hiring in of lawyers to defend cases. I see the Right Honourable Gentleman nodding. I believe it is now somewhere of the order of close to £1 billion of what they expect they're going to have to defend. Surely this says something about banking culture in our society that will still need to be addressed in the future. And finally, one of the things I've been doing in this House is pursuing the issue of Scottish Limited Partnerships and other forms of limited partnerships that have been, particularly since 2008, subjected to use by international criminals, including and perhaps in particular from Eastern Europe, the Ukraine, Russia and the like. It amounts now to many billions of pounds. The urgent question that we faced about 10 days, I think, before recess on the latest money laundering scandal, when I questioned the Minister at the time, I pointed out that at their heart lie these limited partnerships. Since 2008, there have been 22,000 Scottish limited partnerships created that are completely opaque. We have no idea who is owning them. Many of them seek to operate in tax havens, and many of them seek to launder significant amounts of criminal assets. I think this is an issue. Certainly.
I think that the EU is right to say that state debt should not be above 60% of GDP?
Well, I think it's a perfectly reasonable statement for the EU to make and to seek to have some control over debt. It's interesting to note that since all the years since the Scottish Parliament was created, we can at least say today that the Scottish Government has absolutely no debt, something that certainly this Government cannot claim to be able to say. So when you look towards the future, regardless of whether we were going to be in or out of the EU, this country, the UK and all its member nations still face major economic challenges that require will and intelligence to address. And that surely is the message that we should all be taking to our constituents as we face the future.